Today, I'm going to be talking about Rogers' theory of diffusion in the classroom, and the organization that I am using is Lake Hazel Middle School. The purpose of this presentation is to discuss how educators can foster an environment where adopters at all stages can utilize technology in the classroom. So to begin, we're going to talk about Rogers' 5 adopter types. At the top of the list are innovators. So innovators are more complex in their technical knowledge. And because of that, they are most willing to adapt and integrate new ideas and innovations. This group is considered the gatekeepers and leaders of innovation and should be most prepared to cope with technological struggles and levels of uncertainty. Next, we have the early adopters. So while they are not leading as much as innovators, they are still considered leaders in the sense that they are role models who learn from the innovators and help to implement new ideas. Additionally, they help to decrease levels of uncertainty amongst others within the system because they are more subjective with their approval. After that, we have the early majority. So the early majority takes more time to process new innovations and ideas. However, they fall in the middle as they do adopt new innovations before the other half of the group. After that, we have the late majority. The late majority is more skeptical in terms of adopting new innovations. So they take more time before they actually adopt these innovations because they need reassurance from other groups within the system in order to feel comfortable moving forward. And then finally, we have the laggards. So the laggards have no leadership role. The interpersonal networks that they do have are usually within the same group, so laggards stick with each other. And because of that, they have limited awareness and knowledge of innovations. So therefore, they wait until they see that innovations have already been adopted and applied by the 4 other groups before doing so themselves. And due to these factors, the innovation decision period is the longest between the 5 groups. So next, we're going to talk about how in the classroom setting, teachers can utilize early adopters. So the earlier adopters consist of the innovators, early adopters, and the early majority. So it is critical to have students who lead by example to the adoption process through social capital and interaction so that it makes the cultural shift easier for peers. My thought process behind this is that peer-to-peer interaction is so valued in school settings, especially in the middle school setting. So having earlier adopters leading by guidance and assistance is a great way to utilize those students and their knowledge. So having them interact and give feedback to other students not only allows them to help others, but it also allows them to grow within their own knowledge of the technology and new innovations. And with that, they would be sharing their positive interactions that they had and their own experiences with technology, and hopefully progressing forward with that. In thinking of the biblical references and where this is seen in the Bible, my first thought was to look at the 12 disciples. So it says in the New International Version, 2 Corinthians 4:5-6, "For we are not proclaiming ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your slaves because of Jesus. For God, who said, 'Let light shine out of darkness,' has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of God's glory in the face of Jesus Christ." God chose 12 ordinary men, and he made them extraordinary. These men lacked faith, they were self-absorbed, and they were self-promoting. And even though they were human and they had faults and they made mistakes, the more that Jesus poured himself into them, the more that they were transformed by the Spirit. And ultimately, they shared the word of the Lord, and they ended up saving thousands of other people as well. So when you think about how this applies as an early adopter, the 12 disciples were the early adopters. They were the ones who were directly impacted by Jesus Christ himself. And through that, they were able to spread the word to thousands of others. Next, we're going to look at working with the later adopters. So this is the late majority and the laggards. As sociocultural frameworks express, peer support gives students an authentic audience. Additionally, social factors, friends, mentors, and peer support were significant predictors that could influence the decision to adopt technology. So with that being said, kind of going back to what I had mentioned previously with the earlier adopters, it is important to have students working together and also acknowledging the struggles that the later adopters go through. Because by acknowledging those struggles, we can move forward and advocate for student success. And we can pair later adopters with the earlier adopters so that they can see what successful encounters with technology look like. In my opinion, it's not enough for me to stand up there and talk to them and tell them why it's important. I think that having that peer interaction and working together and seeing the successes that earlier adopters have will eventually lead later adopters to also feel like they can be successful with technology. So again, the biblical reference that I thought of had to do with one of the 12 disciples, Peter. And more specifically, this has to do with Peter's denial. So just as Jesus predicted, Peter denied knowing him 3 times before the rooster crowed. He was afraid of being condemned, and so he adamantly denied knowing who Jesus was. But when Peter realized what he had done, he was ashamed and he wept. And moving forward past that, Jesus forgave Peter, and ultimately, Peter became the leader of the disciples and saved over 3,000 people. So this just goes to show that even in the face of struggles and adversity, people can still be successful, and failure does not define who a person is. This is shown in the fact that Peter became the leader, and he ultimately moved forward and moved past the struggles that he faced, and he was forgiven. And I think that that's really important to apply to later adopters and for them to know and acknowledge that they can still be successful with technology. So my final thoughts before we wrap all this up. As an educator, leading students with a Christ-like mentality is important to ensure the success of each student. Teachers need to understand that each child is unique and that students learn at different paces. And the diversity that comes from within a classroom should be supported. When we as educators foster learning through love, compassion, understanding, and support like Jesus did, it helps students feel heard and valued. And when they feel that value, that emotional support in an educational space, it encourages them to want to learn new innovations.